The laundromat on Clemson Street smelled the way it always did, warm fabric and old soap, and something faintly metallic from the pipes behind the dryers. I had been coming there for 11 years. Since Gerald passed and I sold the house with the big yard and moved into the apartment on Birchwood, the laundromat became my Tuesday ritual. Load in by 9. Coffee from the gas station next door. Sit by the window and watch the street wake up. That particular Tuesday in March, I almost didn't go. My hip had been giving me trouble, the kind of low ache that settles in when the weather can't make up its mind between winter and spring. But the sheets needed washing, and I had run out of reasons to put it off. So I pulled on my coat, the navy one with the broken button I kept meaning to replace, and I walked the 4 blocks to Clemson. It was quiet inside. A young woman folding clothes in the back. A man I recognized from the neighborhood, reading something on his phone. I loaded my machine, dropped in my quarters, and settled into my usual chair by the window with my coffee. I didn't notice her right away. She was sitting 2 chairs down from me, older than me even, with white hair pulled back neat and hands that were folded in her lap like she was waiting for something specific. She wasn't reading. She wasn't on her phone. She was just sitting there, watching the machines turn. I thought maybe she was having one of those mornings. I had plenty of those myself. Then she looked at me. Not the quick glance you give a stranger. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've been thinking about for a while. She reached into the tote bag beside her, pulled out a plain white envelope, and held it out toward me. I didn't take it at first. "What is this?" I said. "Something you'll need," she said. Her voice was steady, not unkind. "Sooner than you think. Sooner than you think." I looked at the envelope. My name was on the front. Not my full name, just Francis, written in blue ink, in handwriting I didn't recognize. "How do you know my name?" I asked. She just said, "Please take it," so I took it. And before I could ask anything else, she stood up, gathered her bag, and walked out. No laundry in any of the machines, nothing in the dryers. She had come there just to find me. I sat there holding the envelope for a long time. My coffee went cold. The machine finished its cycle, and I didn't move to switch it over. I didn't open it there. I don't know why. Something told me not to. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket, and it stayed there all day while I went through the motions, switching the load, folding everything on the table at home, making lunch, watching the news. I kept touching it through the fabric just to confirm it was still there. That evening, my daughter called. She called most evenings, which I had always considered a blessing. Her name is Wanda, and she lives 40 minutes away in Maplewood with her husband, Terrence, and their 2 boys. She's 41 years old and looks more like her father every year, which I mean is the highest compliment. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Hip's a little sore." "You should call Dr. Abrams about that." I know. We talked for a while about the boys, about her job at the school district, about whether she should repaint her kitchen. Normal things. I didn't mention the envelope. After we hung up, I sat down at my kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, like a letter, and a business card, which I set aside for a moment. The letter was short. Only a few paragraphs. It said, "You don't know me, but I know your son Arthur. I have watched him for 2 years, and I am afraid of what he is planning. The business card belongs to an estate attorney in your city. I am asking you to call her before the end of this week. Please do not tell Arthur that you have done so. Your husband's life insurance policy and the property on Lake Garner are not safe. I am sorry to be the one to tell you this. I am telling you because no one else will. It wasn't signed. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down on the table and looked at the wall for a while. My son Arthur is 53 years old. He was Gerald's favorite, which I always pretended not to notice. He has his father's square jaw and his father's laugh and very little else of Gerald in him, as it turned out. He lives an hour north of me with his wife Denna in a house they bought during the pandemic when prices were still reasonable. He calls me on Sundays. He comes for Thanksgiving and sometimes Christmas. He fixes things around my apartment when he visits, Little things like the faucet in the bathroom and the hinge on the cabinet door, and I used to watch him and feel grateful. I turned the business card over in my hand. Rosalind Okafor, attorney at law, estate planning and elder law. There was a local number and an address downtown. I told myself it was nothing, some misunderstanding. Arthur had his quirks. Sure, he'd always been better with money than with feelings, and Denna was harder to warm up to than I would have liked. But planning something? Against me? I put the letter back in the envelope, put it in the kitchen drawer under the dish towels, and went to bed. I did not sleep. By morning, I had made up my mind. Not because I believed it, not really, but because Gerald used to say that you check the smoke detector even when you don't smell smoke. You call the doctor about the lump, even when you're sure it's nothing. You don't skip the step just because the stairs look fine. I called the number on the card at 9 that morning. The woman who answered was warm but professional. She said Ms. Okafor had an opening Thursday at 2 o'clock. I wrote it down and said I would be there. Then I called my son. I didn't tell him about the envelope. I just wanted to hear his voice, to see if anything sounded different. "Mom," he said, picking up on the second ring. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "I was just thinking about you. Is the hip still bothering you?" "A little." "You know," he said, "Dina and I were actually talking about you recently. We think it might be worth having a conversation about your situation, your long-term plans." My stomach went quiet. "What kind of conversation?" I said. "Nothing bad, just practical stuff. The Lake Garner property has been sitting there since Dad passed, and the taxes on it aren't cheap. We thought maybe it made sense to talk about it. Together, as a family." "That's fine," I said. "We can talk sometime. Maybe next weekend? We could come down Saturday." "Let me check my calendar," I said. I didn't check anything. I just stood there in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, thinking about the word we. Thursday came gray and cold. I took the bus downtown and found the office building without much trouble, a modest brick building on Farwell Avenue with a directory in the lobby. Rosalind Okafor's office was on the 4th floor. She was a woman in her mid-50s, I guessed, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the desk that was stacked but organized. She shook my hand and offered me coffee, which I accepted, and then she sat across from me and folded her hands and said, "Tell me what's going on." So I told her everything. The letter, the laundromat, the woman I didn't know, the conversation with my son. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Francis," she said. I had told her my first name. She was using it gently. "I want to ask you a few questions about your estate, if that's all right. Your husband's life insurance policy and the Lake Garner property specifically." We spent the next 40 minutes going through things. Gerald had left a life insurance policy, $280,000, and the beneficiary had been updated 2 years ago, which I had signed off on without reading the paperwork carefully. I thought it was a formality, a routing update. Rosalind pulled up the state registry on her computer and showed me what that update had actually done. The primary beneficiary was no longer me. It was Arthur. And under a clause I had never seen before, if the property on Lake Garner was transferred or sold within the estate, the proceeds would pass directly to the primary beneficiary. "Did you sign a transfer document at any point?" she asked. "Anything about the property? Even just a general power of attorney?" I thought back. About 2 years ago, Arthur had come to visit and brought some paperwork he said was for the estate account Gerald had set up. He said it was just to simplify things, so I could stop worrying about the financial side of stuff. He walked me through it at my kitchen table. I signed 3 or 4 pages. I didn't have my reading glasses that day. I told Rosalind that. She took a breath. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "I think you may have signed a limited power of attorney and possibly a beneficiary redirection form. We need to pull the full documents to confirm. But if I'm reading this correctly, your son may be in a position to manage your Lake Garner property on your behalf and direct those proceeds to himself without requiring your signature again." The room was very still. I had sat in a lot of quiet rooms in my life, The room where the doctor told me Gerald's scan results. The room where we signed the papers after he passed. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes from realizing that something has been happening around you while you were not paying attention. Can it be reversed? I said. Some of it, yes. Some of it depends on what was actually signed and when. She was already writing something on a notepad. I want to file a few things this week, just as a protective measure. And I need to ask you, do you have anyone you trust? A family member? A close friend? Someone who can be with you while we sort this out? My daughter, I said. Wanda. Good. Tell her. I called Wanda from the parking garage. I sat in the stairwell on the second level, on a concrete step that was cold through my coat, and I told her everything while the sound of cars moving below us came up through the floor. She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mom, how long has this been going on? I don't know, I said. I don't know how long. I'm coming over tonight. You don't have to. I'm coming over tonight, she said again firmly, the way she gets when she has made a decision. She arrived at 6 with Terrence and a pan of food she had made quickly, chicken and rice, the kind of meal that means I love you, and I didn't know what else to do. We sat at the kitchen table after the boys were settled with the TV, and I spread out the envelope and the letter and what Rosalind had written down for me. Wanda read everything twice. Terrence, who is a careful man and not given to quick reactions, said, Has Arthur done anything else unusual lately? Anything that seemed off? I thought about it. A few months ago, Arthur had asked me, just in passing, he'd said, whether I'd updated my will since Dad passed. I had said yes, even though I wasn't entirely sure. He'd nodded and said something like, Good, just making sure everything is in order. I'd thought he was being responsible, thoughtful even. And the visits. He'd been coming down more often than usual, once a month or so since the summer. Dina always came with him. She was friendly in a way that felt practiced, complimenting my apartment, asking how I was sleeping. One time she had gone through my filing cabinet while Arthur fixed the bathroom light. She said she was looking for a pen. I hadn't thought about that until right now. Wanda looked at Terrence. Then she looked at me. We need to call a lawyer, she said. I already have one, I said. Her name is Rosalind. I'm seeing her again Monday. Something in Wanda's face shifted, like she'd been bracing for this conversation to go differently, and she was recalibrating. Okay, she said. Good, that's good, Mom. Arthur called Saturday morning just after 8. Still good for today, he said. We were thinking we'd come down around noon, get some lunch, and then just sit down and go through some things. I had spent 2 days thinking about what I would say. Arthur, I said, I think I'd like to wait on that conversation. My hip has been bothering me and I'm not up for a full afternoon. A pause, not long, maybe 3 seconds. Of course, he said, no rush. How about next week? Let's play it by ear, I said. Sure, another pause. Mom, is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I'm just tired. When I hung up, my hands were steady. I hadn't expected that. I thought I would be shaking. The following week was strange. Rosalind filed a revocation of the power of attorney, which would take effect once properly served. She also flagged the beneficiary change with the insurance company's legal department. She said it would take time and that Arthur might be notified through certain channels, which I needed to be prepared for. He called me on Wednesday. His voice was different. Not angry exactly. Tight. Mom, I got something in the mail. From an attorney. I know, I said. Silence. What is this? He said. It's me looking after myself, I said. The way I should have been doing all along. I was trying to help you. That's all I was doing. You don't understand how this stuff works, Mom. You never did. And there it was. The thing underneath the Sunday calls and the fixed faucets and the birthday cards signed with his full name like a signature. The way he'd always thought about me. She doesn't understand. She needs us to handle it. She'll be grateful later. I understand enough, I said. He raised his voice then. He said things that I won't repeat, not because they hurt me, but because they don't deserve to take up any more space. When he was finished, I said, "I love you, Arthur, but this conversation is over." And I hung up. Wanda called 20 minutes later. I think he must have called her too. "Are you all right?" she said. "I'm all right," I said. And the strange thing was, I meant it. Rosalind moved quickly. The insurance company launched an internal review. The property on Lake Garner remained in my name, and with the power of attorney revoked, Arthur had no path to transfer it. He retained his own attorney, a man in a gray suit who sent several letters that Rosalind handled without involving me much, which I appreciated. The process took 4 months. 4 months of paperwork and phone calls, and one afternoon where I sat in a conference room across a long table from Arthur and Dana and their lawyer, and I looked at my son's face and tried to find the little boy in it. The one who used to ask me to check under his bed because he was afraid of the dark. He didn't look at me once. In the end, the beneficiary on Gerald's policy was restored to me. The property stayed in my name. Arthur's attorney eventually stopped sending letters. Wanda and I drive out to Lake Garner sometimes now, on Sunday afternoons when the boys don't have games. The water is dark green in the fall, and the cabin needs work. Always needs work. But I sit on the porch with my coffee and look out at the trees, and I feel Gerald there in a way. I don't feel him anywhere else. I never found out who the woman in the laundromat was. I asked around, the man who runs the place, a few regulars. Nobody knew her. Nobody had seen her before or since. Rosalind, when I told her, just nodded like it was the kind of thing she heard sometimes and never got an explanation for. I go back to Clemson Street every Tuesday. Same chair by the window. Coffee from the gas station. Still in the same paper cup they've used for 30 years. I look for her sometimes. I'd like to thank her. I don't know what I did to deserve someone stepping in like that, someone who had no reason to, but I've learned not to question every good thing that comes to you. Some of them don't come with explanations. Some of them just come when you need them most, handed across a quiet room by someone who knew something you didn't yet, that you were stronger than you've been asked to be, and that it was almost time to find out. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not the legal part. Rosalind handled most of that, and I trusted her to. I mean the part before any of it. The years before the laundromat, before the envelope, before I finally sat down with a stranger in a 4th-floor office and learned what my own signature had been used to do. The truth is, I let it happen gradually. Not all at once. It never is all at once. It was a form here, a conversation I didn't push back on there. It was telling myself that Arthur was just being practical, that Denna was just being thorough, that I was lucky to have a son who thought about these things, so I didn't have to. I handed over my trust in small pieces, and each piece felt like nothing by itself. That's the thing nobody tells you about losing your footing. It doesn't feel like falling. It feels like resting. What I know now, sitting on the porch at Lake Garner on a Sunday afternoon with Wanda and the boys nearby, is that I gave away my clarity long before I gave away any paperwork. I stopped reading things carefully because it felt easier. I stopped asking questions because I didn't want to seem difficult. I had spent so many years being the person who smoothed things over, kept the peace, assumed good intent, and I had confused that with wisdom. It wasn't wisdom. It was avoidance. Dressed up in a nice coat. Arthur made choices. That is on him, fully and completely. I don't carry his choices, but I also made choices to sign without reading, to trust without verifying, to feel grateful for attention without asking what it was in exchange for. And those choices opened a door I didn't know I'd left unlocked. The woman in the laundromat didn't give me anything I didn't already have. She gave me a piece of paper. What I did with it, calling Rosalind, telling Wanda, sitting across that conference room table and not looking away, that came from somewhere inside me that had been quiet for a long time. She just knocked on the door. I think about that often, how close I came to throwing the envelope away, how easy it would have been to talk myself out of it, to decide it was a mistake or a prank or someone else's drama. I almost did. I almost convinced myself that the comfortable version of events was the true one. Courage isn't a feeling. I used to think it was, this rush of certainty that tells you to act. But it's not. It's a decision made in the absence of certainty, when you're tired and your hip hurts and part of you just wants to sit back down and pretend you didn't see what you saw. I'm 67 years old. I spent most of my life being careful not to take up too much space. What I've learned, slowly and not without cost, is that paying attention to your own life is not selfishness. Asking questions is not ingratitude. Reading what you sign is not distrust. These are the basic acts of a person who respects herself enough to stay awake. If I could say anything to someone sitting where I was sitting 2 years ago, it would be this. The discomfort of looking closely is always smaller than the cost of looking away. Always. I have never once regretted opening that envelope. I have spent years regretting the things I didn't read carefully enough before.